but the war against Moscow is being won by the Ukrainians.
Not talk about Russia-Ukraine with quite possibly the leading Russia expert in the United States sitting on stage here. Let me start with you, Dr. Rice, because
Condoleezza Rice is the supreme leader of the free world.
The choices don't look great. It's either a forever war or cutting a deal that is going to undermine a very brave and attacked country. I'm just going to throw it open to you. Where do we go from here? If you were in the Situation Room,
well,
what do you advise?
Things have flipped a lot, and it's largely look, the battlefield, the conventional battlefield is basically stunted at this point. A couple kilometers here, a couple kilometers there. But the Russians are losing enormous numbers of people, as many casualties as 35,000 a month. Vladimir Putin is finally running out of people. He was happy to send the poor kids of Dagestan and Khabarovsk to the war. He didn't have to mobilize the blonde kids of Moscow and St. Petersburg. And now he's going to face a choice, because he's either going to have to do a general mobilization, which will be extremely unpopular in Moscow, or he's going to have to do what I heard from one of my colleagues, which is advertise in African countries to come get a job in Russia. And guess what your job is?
He's already doing that, yeah.
Right. Vladimir Putin is sleeping in bunkers because he's afraid to sleep in his house. And when he had his St. Petersburg forum, his guests arrived to smoke plumes from refineries that had been hit by the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians have brought the war home to Russia. And that's different. The Crimea is cut off, has no fuel supply. So he's going to, the problem with Vladimir Putin is that he just can't believe that the great Russian Empire can't defeat Ukraine. He just can't believe it. And so I worry that he may try to escalate horizontally into the north of NATO. I mean, Kaliningrad is up there with the Baltic states. That's problematic. But I think it's more likely that he is going to try to create mass casualty attacks on Ukraine against civilians to try to break the will of the Ukrainian people. It's one reason that defensive systems for the Ukrainians are extremely important at this moment, because they are winning the war, not the ground war, but the war against Moscow is being won by the Ukrainians.
Secretary Pritzker, do you want to jump in?
I want to ask a question, actually, if you don't mind. But I mean, just this past weekend, or right after the 4th of July, you saw, I mean, basically, I think they're out of Patriot missiles, or very close.
Yes, right.
And you saw 23 Russian missiles get through.
Yeah.
And so, to me, if you're the United States, I mean, Europe has only got so much supply, and I worry about, at some point, they're going to say themselves to their own populations, I can't keep giving my supply over to Ukraine.
Yeah.
If you're sitting in the Oval Office advising the president, now what? Or Secretary Esper, how do we get more air defense?
I'd like Mark to speak to the technical aspects of it. I do think the Ukrainians have learned how to, even without sophisticated air defenses, they're doing relatively well with intelligence, and that helps.
Yes.
But the big story is whether or not the president's apparent promise to license the Ukrainians to build defensive systems, because they're going to be fast at doing it.
So fast 6 months? Is fast 2 years?
Well, Mark can speak to that.
Can I ask you to answer that question, but because we're running out of time, can I ask you also to address another question, which is related, which is the lessons, the military lessons from the war in Ukraine for the U.S., because the technological changes have changed rapidly that have given the Ukrainians the advantage, or has stimulated debate within the Pentagon about, oh gosh, should we go through another revolution in military affairs? Do we need to get rid of all legacy systems and just buy drones? So can you address those two issues before we run out of time here?
Well, look, I think on the first part with regard to the announcement by the president regarding the license to build Patriots, I think it was an important signal of confidence. It was a good boost for the Ukrainians, and the president and President Zelensky had a good meeting, far different than what happened in the Oval Office. That said, it's going to take quite amount of time to get plants built, factories, equipment in, workers trained, et cetera. We know the example from Germany, who was given a license in 2022, is yet to build a single Patriot, in my understanding. So that said, what do? Look, I wouldn't ask the Baltic states to give up Patriots if they have them, but Greece, for example, has a surplus of missiles. So I think if you look around the alliance and other countries, you can manage the risk and then put more Patriots, get more Patriots into the system that way. And then, you know, they're trying to build an indigenous capability, and the Germans and French have the same. So I think there are ways to do that. I might also add that since World War II, there's never been an example that I can recall where bombardment of cities has broken the will of a people. It's actually done the
No,
opposite.
I was going to say, I think that's the main point. Look, I will bet you it won't take them 6 months to build the first Patriot.
I hope you're right.
These people are pretty incredible.
So that,
And one thing that's not really understood about Ukraine is it was actually the arsenal of the Soviet Union. One reason that their defense industries are so sophisticated is a lot of those engineers are still there. But the point that I wanted to make is the strategy is to try to break the will of the Ukrainian people. I don't think that's going to happen.
I agree. I think the Russians would break beforehand. On the second point, because Connie touched on it, look, the battlefield right now looks like a World War I battlefield, but it's being fought, it's being won by the Ukrainians with 21st century technology, drones. So what the Ukrainians have done, because of their manpower issues and because of Russian defenses and whatnot, has revolutionized, at the risk of using that word, and taught everybody how to use drones. So think in the last few years what they've done. As far as I can recall, the first ever sinking of a capital warship by an unmanned drone, and then pushed the Black Sea fleet back into the Black Sea, pretty much neutered them. In the last few months, first ever, as best I know, that Russian soldiers on one of the front lines humans surrendered to aerial and ground drones deployed in combat. And then just in the last 24 hours, if the reporting is correct, the Ukrainians conducted an amphibious landing with a drone that offloaded a ground drone to conduct an amphibious assault. It's incredible. They are writing the book on doctrine, tactics, technology, people, innovation, to Connie's point being industrious. There's so much we can learn about them, not just about grit and perseverance and courage, but being innovative and industrious. And I got to tell you, we're years behind them, it feels like, when it comes to this deployment. We've fortunately successfully first deployed surface attack drones against the Iranians just in the last 48 hours. Good use, but the Ukrainians have been doing that for years. So, look, I think there is a revolution going on. You asked me about this beforehand. There are a lot of people that say we should go all drones, and others say no, stick to what we have. Look, it's going to be a combination. Autonomy is going to be an important part of warfare. It's going to be another tool in our toolkit, another arrow in our quiver, whatever word you want, and it's going to be the responsibility of soldiers and commanders to figure out how to use those various tools, traditional, conventional types of weapons or the new type of weapons in whatever scenario presents itself. And we just haven't figured out how to even fill those new technologies yet, let alone the tactics and doctrine and everything else. That's going to take some time, unfortunately.
You want to jump in here? Maybe I'll give you the last word to talk about.
In 2023, I was a special representative to Ukraine for economic resilience, if you will. And a lot of what we did was license them a ton of military capability for them to produce themselves, particularly ammunition, et cetera. I agree with you, Secretary Rice. I think they can take an innovation and a license and put it into practice faster than any place I've ever seen. They're extremely creative and resilient when it comes to this. But we have to I think one of the reasons that they're winning, if you will, and is because we've removed impediments for them, what they can and can't do. Which is
interesting. They're defending using traditional high-cost Patriot systems that are very sophisticated and do a great job, but they're winning by employing large volumes of low-cost, relatively sophisticated autonomous
Absolutely,
systems.
But they need both. And in fact,
I agree.
And in
That's
fact,
my talking point.
One of the things that we saw was you really can't keep their economy afloat unless there's air defense. Both, the swarming drone defense as well as Patriot missile defense, and so we need to make sure they get both.
They're getting significant infusions now, thanks to the fact that Viktor Orban can no longer hold
Absolutely.
up European Union aid.
So on that positive note, I'm running out of time. Please join me in thanking for a fabulous opening panel here.